Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Hello. Okay, good afternoon, and welcome to the Levy Institute Keynote event with our distinguished guest, Congressman Khanna. Once again, my name is Pavlina Cherneva. I'm the president of the Levy Institute, and it's my pleasure to introduce to you the moderator of this event, Alan Minsky, who will then in turn introduce Representative Khanna. Alan is a lifelong friend of the Institute and the son of our very own distinguished research scholar, the late Hyman Minsky. As you know, High's groundbreaking work forever changed how the world understands financial crisis. But around the dinner table, Alan tells me that his father spoke most passionately about unemployment, inequality, and poverty. In his 1986 book, Stabilizing an Unstable Economy, High also proposed an agenda for reform that was inspired by the New Deal and centered around the idea of creating jobs for all. Here at the Levy Institute, we have worked to build on that vision, researching sensible fiscal and monetary policies, in particular the federal job guarantee, as part of a transformative framework for economic security, climate resilience, and community renewal. Alan is a distinguished author and in his own right, and carries forward his father's legacy, not just in theory, but in action. He is a lifelong activist, journalist, and coalition builder. He has been the longest-serving director of KPFK Pacifica Radio Los Angeles, and his writings have appeared in The Nation, Common Dreams, Truthdig, and elsewhere. Currently, Alan serves as the executive director of Progressive Democrats of America, where he works alongside policymakers and grassroots leaders to turn bold ideas into reality. In this capacity, Alan also co-authored a 21st Century Economic Bill of Rights, an ambitious and comprehensive strategy for economic security for all. I'm pleased to welcome one of the most relentless advocates leading the charge. Please join me in giving him a warm welcome.
Thank you so much. For people who are not familiar with Progressive Democrats of America, we have one achievement on our resume that stands head and shoulders above the rest. We were the sole national organization to recruit Senator Bernie Sanders to run for president in 2016 and to run as a Democrat. We launched the Run Bernie Run campaign in 2013. I also wanted to start by sending greetings from occupied Los Angeles. Now, about 12 years ago, saying occupied Los Angeles was a very positive thing. Now it is not, and it is earnest, and it is serious. I went through the LAX checkpoints for security. They had dogs, and you walk pair by pair through, and the dogs sniff you. To my left was a middle-aged Latina woman, and you could sense her deep fear and anxiety. They pulled aside two people. You could sense their deep fear and anxiety. This is not a joke, and it's coming to your neighborhood soon. So I want to start also by mentioning that the Tim Carpenter Institute, a 501c3 named after PDA's founder, has started something called the Federal Money Project, and we have federal money memos that we send to Congress, every congressional office, every month, and it is inspired by the work of Pavlina Cherneva and Randy Ray, and so we're going to have people from the assistants and the author of these memos, by the way, is with us, Michael Brennan. And Michael Brennan is going to pass a clipboard, and please put your email in good penmanship on it, and you will all be on the listserv to receive a federal a monthly memo, which is, again, in harmony with the work of the Levy Institute. So if you could please pass those out in the rows now so that people can sign on. And Khanna is an absolutely amazing speaker. You'll hear every word if you just for 1 second pay attention in good penmanship, write your email down, and then you'll get these federal monthly memos. I am absolutely honored to introduce Representative Khanna. He is, of course, the representative from what is probably the wealthiest region in the entire world, which is Silicon Valley. He is also one of the few, sadly have to say few, truly exceptional national politicians. I want to just frame Khanna and Khanna's talk today in the context of the struggle going on inside the Democratic Party. And can we circulate those clipboards now while I'm talking? Michael, can we do that in the central column? It's going, okay, good. And look, as you all know, there's a big struggle inside the Democratic Party. If you were here for Professor Galbraith's comment today, I agree with every word he said about the contemporary Democratic Party. However, I maybe even will cast it a little bit more starkly. I see, since the 2016 election, national politics being split into three major factions nationally. And you have, on the right, you have the reactionary right-wing radicals of the Trumpians. And in the middle, what was running from the Romney wing of the Republican Party through the Clinton wing of the Democratic Party, I view as the political conservatives of our time, okay? And on the left, and I'll get to them in a second, are, of course, the progressives, who actually put forward policies that match up with the needs of the society and the needs, particularly, of the majority of the population. The Romney wing of the Republican Party was run out of the Republican Party, leaving the dominant faction not by popular support of the base of the Democratic Party, but by the moneyed interests that have influence in the Democratic Party, makes the moderate wing or conservative wing of the Democratic Party the dominant faction. I believe, as Jamie also said earlier today, that if that faction continues to win out, then you're ceding all prospects for social change to the reactionary right within the political spectrum. In other words, if the progressive wing of the Democratic Party is suffocated, we're headed towards a fascist society in America, okay? Because, why is that? Because general public satisfaction with the really existing American social contract, contemporary social contract, is almost non-existent. People can't stand it. They know it's a dead end for them. We now have, in economic statistics, is economic a hard science or a soft science? I'd say when you have 40 to 45 years of an economic order and the data available, you can conclude hard scientifically that neoliberalism, we understand what it does. It keeps everybody at best on a hamster wheel, trying to fulfill the American dream, inaccessible to them. The large bill costs of childcare, housing, college, healthcare absolutely destroy the capacity of anybody to move into an upward mobility position. Of course, there's few exceptions, but they're few and far between. And so what we have is we have an economic system, the beneficiaries of which are the investor class. And I do appreciate Warren Buffett's definition of the investor class. You're not rich unless you're making money while you sleep. Now that is a social contract that is due to be rejected by the general population. In other words, all accrued wealth goes to people who contribute no labor to the society. Okay, that is going to be rejected. Now look, we have to maintain a coalition with moderate Democrats because even though they represent classically understood, just definitionally understood to be political conservatives to maintain the current social order, they're constitutionalists. And we need right now to save the democratic constitutional republic in the United States of America. We need to keep it. This is an open society and a free society. But if we're to defeat the fascists, the progressive wing of the party has to become ascendant. And there is no better agent to achieve that, having been in the job I've been for 6 years, than Representative Khanna, okay? And the reason I say that is pretty simple. First of all, his economic understanding and his acumen is unrivaled among any of the people I know in Congress, in either the Senate or the House, as you're about to hear from Ro momentarily. And also, look, I'm not out to create a revolution. We need this transformation to happen democratically. And Khanna is an absolutely unique figure in the contemporary American political landscape, in that there is a good amount of trust and understanding that he is about building a generalized prosperity for the society. That means in a society in which wealth and power has become, here emphasis on power, concentrated in the hands of the elites and the very wealthy, they have to be convinced that what is going forward in a progressive agenda that puts money back in the pockets of the working class is an economic agenda that is not weighted entirely against them, that out of patriotism and for the concern for the general welfare of the population, the country, and the planet, they should embrace. Khanna can speak to them and actually facilitate the transition we need in this country, much like FDR did in his time. And with that, I am absolutely honored to introduce Representative Khanna. Hey.
Well, thank you. If I wasn't nervous enough to be addressing a room full of actual economists, it's one thing to build me up on my economic knowledge, another thing to start talking about FDR. But Alan is an incredible force, intellectual force for the progressive movement. And the reason I say he's an intellectual force is there are two types of things that are needed for progressive activism. One is moral sentiment, moral leadership, but the other is persuasion. And a lot of times progressives have an abundance of the empathy and moral sentiment, but sort of assume that other people will get to where they are without doing the persuasion. Alan brings them both. Alan is someone who's really trying to make the historical, the economic, the intellectual case for a progressive movement in this country. And he's enlisted hundreds of people in every state with Progressive Democrats for America. And so I was so honored when he suggested to come here. So thank you, Alan. Please give him a round of applause. I want to thank, of course, Pavlina for your incredible scholarship. I first learned of her probably first term into Congress with her incredible work on the jobs guarantee and have read a lot of her writings. And so when she said to come for this conference, I said I'd absolutely be honored. Thank you for having me here. And great to see my friend James Galbraith, whose father I admired growing up and whose work challenges us about the times we're in. I want to sketch out how I see the country and our moment and really take advantage of your insights to be challenged, to be questioned, and if you have ideas, because we have such a distinguished group of economists. I read one gentleman's presentation just sitting there that I really appreciated if I lay out what I think the direction needs to be of the progressive movement and the country, and then you offer ideas, critiques, and we have a dialogue. So as Alan mentioned, I represent a district that has $14 trillion of market value. We have 5 companies within the 50-mile radius that are over $1 trillion. Apple, Google, Intel, NVIDIA, Tesla, and now Broadcom. And for many people in the district, the world's their oyster. And you've seen in this country extraordinary economic prosperity in places like Silicon Valley, in places like Seattle, in places like New York. And you saw at the same time the economic growth through the 90s and 2000s of the global GDP. But while we had this story of economic prosperity in places like my district, we at the same time saw communities in this country totally hollowed out. Places like Johnstown, Pennsylvania. Joe Hagan, who's here, was with me recently in Johnstown, saw the impacts of the deindustrialization there. They made more steel than Japan and Germany combined in World War II. Now, a basically ghost town. We were at a diner where they said, I was talking about bringing new steel plants, and I said, what would you really like? And the gentleman said, a casino. And I said, well, okay, I need to think about economic development. But the point was that was their hope for Johnstown. And you look at Lorraine, where I just was, a abandoned steel plant there where the local town thinks that the Mexican drug cartel runs this steel plant as a money laundering operation where they hire and fire people every 2 months just to show that they have some employment. And this is sort of common knowledge, been going on for decades. Hotel occupancy, 30%. My point is all these towns, places like Milwaukee, I met Quentin, who said something so shocking to me. He said that his uncle, an African-American in the 1960s, he believes had more economic opportunity in Milwaukee than he thinks his kids have as African-American kids there today. Hollowing out of the industrial base, a hollowing out up till 2023 based on NAFTA, Master Lock shutting down, Quentin lost his job, moving from $25, $30 hour jobs to $16 jobs doing warehouse, logistics, not doing advanced manufacturing. Income inequality in this country, we've gone from 58th in the world in the 1980s to most measures have us at 128th in the world today. China is in the 70s. So we see this extraordinary economic prosperity in certain places of the country, and the hollowing out, the economic stagnation of much of the country that built America. And that's what Trump comes and says. He says, you know, Rose family, my family is middle class. I was born in Philadelphia in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. My dad was an engineer, my mom a school teacher. But metaphorically, Trump says, you know, they didn't build America. They didn't fight. They didn't scale the cliffs of Normandy. They didn't fight in the Civil War. They didn't fight in the Revolutionary War, all these folks in Silicon Valley. You built America. You built the steel. You built the coal. You built this country. What happened to you? Where's your place? Where are you being celebrated? They're celebrating the techies. They're celebrating these immigrant entrepreneurs. They're celebrating Wall Street, but they're not celebrating you. They're not celebrating the people who built this country. And I believe that the power of his message is fundamentally a understanding of the loss, not just of economic prosperity, the loss of social respect, the loss of pride that people had who built this country. And to top that, post-1965, this country has become more diverse in terms of race, in terms of religion, in terms of ethnic background than we've ever been before. We have more foreign-born today in the United States than we ever have since the early 1920s. And of course, it was the 1920s that had the most anti-immigrant sentiment, as you know, in the early 1924. So the challenge, in my view, for the country is not just providing economic security for people to be able to have the economic dream. It's to be able to provide people, again, across this country with a sense of economic purpose, economic hope, economic independence, a sense that they can stay in their communities, be part of their communities, and participate in producing and contributing to their community, to their family, and to the country. And that's why I believe, as I articulate a new economic patriotism, that it has to have two components to it. It has to have a component to it that talks about economic production, economic development, and it has to have a component of an economic Bill of Rights, of an economic security. Progressives make a mistake if we simply focus on the economic security, if we simply focus on making sure that people have a strong social safety net, though that's necessary. We also have to focus on how are we going to provide them with an opportunity to build economic wealth, to build economic security in their communities, to participate in a common national mission of economic prosperity. It's needed not simply politically, and I would argue politically it matters, because before you can convince people to trust your judgment on higher taxation, which I'm for, and a strong social safety net, which I'm for, they need to trust your judgment that you'll be good on the economic growth and economic prosperity of a nation. That's a simple political formula in this country that I think one has to earn that trust of voters before they hear your message on issues of fundamental redistribution. I'm often amazed when people say, you know, Donald Trump, you know, he's a terrible business person, terrible at all instincts about politics. And I said, but that's not how most people see him in the country. Most people see him as someone who built real estate, who has Trump names everywhere, whose games are played by young kids. They think, oh, Trump knows the economy more than these politicians. A lot of times when I go into rooms, they think, okay, the Indian guy from Silicon Valley must know something about the economy. If it's about that's simple. But we have to earn people's trust on an economic prosperity, economic growth agenda to be able to articulate why we're right on an economic fairness agenda. What can we do then on an economic growth agenda, particularly also looking at the impacts of technology and AI, which are down the line? Let me sketch out a few ideas for what I believe we need to do in terms of building economic prosperity and economic production across this country in a common economic vision. And then I'll turn to what I think we need to do on an economic Bill of Rights. I believe we need the equivalent of a new 21st century Marshall Plan for the United States of America. We should have a White House Economic Development Council focused fundamentally on the economic renewal and economic development of every community in this country, working with the local government and local state and governments about what is needed. It should be every Democratic Party's first, second, and third mission to say, our goal is going to be your community's economic success, your family's economic success, your kids' economic success, and we're going to understand a 21st century vision to do it. And our contrast with Donald Trump should be pretty simple. He asks the right questions, as David Brooks said. He just has all the wrong answers. He thinks that the way to build economic prosperity in Johnstown and in Youngstown is to have 19th century tariffs and is to have us march into Panama and Mexico. And even if it was moral to be James Polk, it's simply not possible in the modern world. And most Americans understand that. In painting someone as a Luddite, and I know here the economists, some of the people, Luddites were just working for workers' rights, but painting someone as a Luddite in American politics is actually a pretty effective way of painting him. Instead of all the other things about Donald Trump, it's just that he just doesn't understand. He's a 1980s guy offering 19th century solutions to a world you know is totally changed. We have a vision for how you're going to build economic security, economic independence in your communities for your kids in the 21st century. And that will be the first, second, and third priority of the Democratic Party. How then do we implement this 21st century Marshall Plan for the United States? One, we need to work with the local communities in building up what they need and asking what they need. Not every person needs a semiconductor factory. I wrote the Chips and Science Act. You're not going to put a semiconductor factory in Farrell, Pennsylvania. Not every person wants an advanced battery site there. You know what's amazing to me is we basically watched with the deregulation of the trucking industry with Carter, with NAFTA under Reagan and Bush and Clinton, and then the ascension of China under Clinton. We watched these towns get hollowed out. We didn't do anything for 30 to 40 years. Then we had people write Brookings papers and say, okay, here are the jobs that we want to put around the country. No one said, well, what do you want? What do you need in your communities? Then we had a speech about turning around deindustrialized places where President Biden, who I respect and who did a lot, goes to Chicago to give a speech about turning around deindustrialized communities. I said, well, Chicago is exactly the parts of the place that's prospering. Why not give that speech from Galesburg, Illinois? Why not give that speech from a place that actually is deindustrialized? We need to not have this top-down approach of just looking at what people in Washington are saying communities need, but actually working with those local communities. For some places, it may be an advanced steel plant with hydrogen. For some places, it may be a pill manufacturer. For some places, it may be something in healthcare. For some people, it may be something with a community college. For some places, it may be looking at setting up new infrastructure jobs. But we need to look community by community at what can build economic vision. The second thing we need is a national investment bank that is able to mobilize and finance new industry. Part of the problem with Trump is he's got these tariffs to protect industry, but you need the industry first. We need to have a financing of scaling of whether it's new factories, whether it's new industry or new jobs. You need to have the federal government both play a role in helping with the financing and helping with the procurement. And we need a vision for the development of a workforce, both in terms of new trades schools for advanced plumbing and electricians and machinists, but also for jobs in technology, a huge amount of jobs. You know, there are 1.5 million jobs as content creators in the United States. 1.5 million content creators, 67,000 steelworkers. I'm not saying we need all content creators, but I'm saying that there are a lot of jobs that can be out there in different communities that we need to be preparing folks for. Digital jobs, data jobs, digital marketing jobs. We should be having trade schools and what I call AI academies in every part of this country. Not AI academies because everyone should be working at Google, because you could be a home care worker who now understands basic digital technology that allows you to be a home care worker and know where what the patient's needs are in terms of understanding their medicines or their routine. We need to have a vision where we're funding new industry, funding new trade schools and training schools across the country, funding new AI, By the way, we need to have it universal, that everyone learns from technology from kindergarten to 12th grade in this country. The Chinese have a vision to have the entire nation AI literate by 2030. They understand that the basic tools of being proficient with technology are going to be critical for any job, whether that is as a scholar, whether that's as a farmer, whether that's in advanced tools of the skills. We need to be understanding that. And AI, in an odd way, could be similar to the power loom in the Industrial Revolution, where at the one point, people who understood the power loom had huge, enormous profits because it was a very specialized skill. But then everyone started to understand the power loom, and we saw that the profits of understanding the power loom declined. The potential of AI, I'm not saying it depends on how we operate. One of the potentials of AI is to make sure that people now don't need advanced coding and skills to be able to use technology, if we can have the ability to get everyone proficient in the use of this technology. So investments in new industry, investments in trade and in technology, investments in places like healthcare and healthcare jobs. This is one of the things I've never understood in this country, this debate about, well, do we need more manufacturing or do we need more service? We need both. Of course you want advanced manufacturing as part of an economy for innovation, but of course you understand that you can't have a modern workforce just supported with advanced manufacturing jobs. The University of Chicago, where I went, one of the interesting anecdotes, I was just back there, that the university president shared with me, is that the university faculty would have to be out on the circuit when they were tenured, and they'd have to teach classes under Harper to people who did not go to college, because Harper really believed that the university should be helping educate the entire population. And it led to the first community college at Jolie in Illinois. And so what the University of Chicago is doing now is to create a healthcare center to give credential people for jobs in healthcare that may not require a college degree. Those are things that we can be doing in community after community with an economic development council working with the local leadership, local universities to build economic prosperity. And we could have national goals about what we need to do to have self-sufficiency for medical equipment, which we didn't have in the pandemic, national goals for what we need to do to be developing new cures for disease, national goals for what we need to do to be leading in new industry, whether that's in advanced steel or shipbuilding. We can bridge both the national aspirations and the local communities by having economic development across this country with the critical investment. And we need to leverage the private sector. The reality is we need to leverage the private sector in two ways. We need to leverage the private sector, one, in terms of the investment into these communities, because it's part of the ability to have jobs. 85% of jobs today are in the private sector. We need to make sure that some of those jobs are everywhere. Doesn't mean people can't go and have government jobs, but they need to be part of the investment opportunities in communities. And the federal government can match some of that private sector investment. And we need to have the private sector work with the government in the execution. We need strong state capacity, so it's not simply deregulation in how to build economic prosperity, but we also should have the private sector involved to build the country. Of course, here FDR is a good example, where he had Bill Knudsen, who was the head of General Motors, as the head of the War Production Board, where we went from 1,000 to 300,000 airplanes. You know, the unemployment rate in the New Deal did not fall from 18% to 4% until 1941. It was really FDR bringing in the private sector, working with government to industrialize America with labor that led to the industrialization. We can have a similar model with a modern scale and modern technology for communities across this country today. We have to be mindful of AI and both job displacement and making sure workers have a voice. Previous point, the workers need to make sure in federal funding that they have collective bargaining, labor neutrality, and a say in the profits that they're going to make if we're going to have federal taxpayer dollars used for that. That has to be the bargain in these places. So it's not just going as corporate subsidies to industry. And that's not anything new. That's basically the FDR model that had a central place for the private sector, for government, and for labor. With AI, one of the places where the job displacement, I think, is the most acute is for 21 to 30-year-olds. The unemployment rate today for college graduates between 21 and 30 is 15%. It's a staggering statistic. By the way, 21 to 30 for vocational education is about 2%, but for college graduates, it's 15%. Some of that is people maybe who don't have a college degree, maybe less fussy and want to be willing to work as a barista or willing to work as a server. Some of it is that those jobs have been less automated, less hard to find. People estimate that with AI, that unemployment rate for 21 to 29 college graduates could go as high as 30%. The jobs most at risk are those entry-level jobs. This is why one of the ideas I've proposed and I'm trying to flesh out is to have a future workforce administration modeled after FDR's public workforce administration. Have the government hire people between 21 and 30 to do important tasks, whether they're in climate, whether in healthcare, whether in institutional building, so that they develop some of the basic experience that they can in the government when it is so difficult for them to get entry-level jobs in a private sector which maybe have AI as automation. And then allow them to develop that and transition to the private sector after, if that's what they choose, after they have opportunity. We also need to make sure in this AI world that we are privileging workers to have a say over technology, people over machines, not machines over people. And here I've been very influenced by Darren Acemoglu's work, who talks about excessive automation versus automation that is enhancing productivity. We can get into the details about changes in the tax code, but suffice it to say that if AI is not developed both with the democratization of of education and with worker voice and worker say, you're going to have further economic divides with wealth continuing to pile up in my district and disenfranchising workers. We need workers to be having a say in how to adopt AI, in whether, in the speed of the adoption, and in whether jobs are still needed. This is why I've sided with the truck drivers over the driverless trucks to say truck drivers are needed, and we should have regulations about the pace of automation and adoption in an AI world. So that, in some detail, is the vision on the economic production. A Marshall Plan, a targeted place of deindustrialized communities, investment in new industries, investment in also the service sector, tailored to both local communities and national goals, setting up the types of trade schools and AI academies and digital education that's going to be needed for people to be part of the 21st century economy, providing economic independence and stability for every community with certain national goals of what we want to achieve. But to be able to do this, we need to have a world where people have basically the things I got as growing up in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, minus the loans that I had to take out. But I never had to really worry about going to a doctor. I didn't have to worry about going to a dentist. I didn't have to worry about living in a safe community. I was fortunate to have people who looked after me when I was growing up. And this is the basics that this country needs to be offering every person in America. We are producing more wealth than we ever have in the history of the world. In my district, I don't think, maybe you're economists, many of you, I don't think I would challenge someone to say, is there a place and period that has produced this much wealth in human history? Maybe there is, but we're certainly comparable. And you're telling me that given this kind of production, that it is difficult for us to be able to guarantee everyone health care, education, housing, childcare? Of course it's not. This is where I think we can start to fulfill FDR's dream of an economic Bill of Rights. And here it's pretty simple. We should be increasing taxes on the billionaires and multimillionaires in my district. I don't understand how this is a hard vote for 434 other members of Congress. None of them have the kind of economic wealth that my district does. We could tax it more, and they're still going to do their new AI companies and their new technology companies and build more wealth. We should be increasing taxes on things like stock buybacks that are speculative and at best. We should be having some kind of financial transaction tax. We should be increasing the tax on estates by having a step up in basis, so that we don't just have unearned or inherited wealth in this country. And with that financing, we should be working towards the basic aspects of an economic New Deal, a Medicare for all. Why? Because the costs of healthcare, as you know, are almost twice what any other industrialized country pays, and our healthcare outcomes are terrible comparatively when it comes to infant mortality, when it comes to maternal mortality, when it comes to life expectancy. We all know that insurance companies are sucking out money without really providing the type of health care that people need. And I've had to struggle as a congressman with having my prior authorizations denied, let alone what the experience is for someone who does not have the same title or the same resources. If we went to Medicare for all, every doctor would be in network. Every hospital would be in network. We would save an extraordinary amount of money by eliminating some of the middlemen. And we would have saved some of the fraud. I mean, Medicare Advantage is basically upcoding in making patients sicker than they are, taking our taxpayer dollars and then not covering catastrophic care. We can start Medicare for all by moving people from 55, started with people 55 and up. I believe one of the big misses of the Biden administration was not pushing for what he and Bernie agreed to, which was to start to have Medicare for all. And if we started with people 55 and up, that is, those are folks who really need the health care. That's a time where your body starts to have more wear and tear, where you start to have more medical challenges, where unfortunately sometimes you may get laid off or you may get pushed out. That's a time of real vulnerability. So I'm for Medicare for all, but at the very least we should start by expanding Medicare. By the way, when Clinton did the whole healthcare thing in the 1990s, Monahan said, well, the only really thing that's simple and Americans will understand is expanding Medicare. It's also the easiest thing to explain. People are by and large happy with Medicare. We want to expand it. And expansion of Medicare doesn't mean that you eliminate private insurance. And people have supplemental insurance to Medicare today. It means that you're expanding the Medicare coverage. Now, we could debate how robust that Medicare coverage is. I'd like it to be as robust as possible. And then, if people are not happy, they get to have their insurance as a supplemental insurance. So we don't have to get tricked into, well, you're going to lose something. No, you're going to gain something. And the amount, everyone's going to have to pay something for Medicare. Some people have to pay for Medicare today. But the amount they're going to pay is far less than the amount that they have to pay for health insurance. And we just need to be honest about that. Second, we should have free public college in this country, or free trade schools. That, just like we had the free high school movement. You know, Piketty has a work where he shows that in the 1950s, Americans had about 80% of people going to high school. The Europeans had 20 to 30% in Britain, France, and Germany. That's how America emerged as a dominant post-World War economy. We basically said high school isn't something for the elite. High school is for everyone. We now need to say post-high school education, trade schools or college are for everyone. And if we have free public college and free trade schools, that's what we need to do to prepare for a modern 21st century economy. It would have saved me about $150,000 of loans, but the reality is that we are depriving people of getting the education that they need because we're burdening them with such economic hardship. And again, we don't have to pit the people who don't have a college degree with the PhDs. We need both. Yes, 60% of folks don't have a college degree, and we have not done enough to focus on that as a country. But we, at the same time, need the PhDs and the college graduates to be creating the new industries and the new factories. So we can be for free public college and also say that we need more funding for apprenticeships, more funding for trade schools, and to have both paths be funded by the government. So you have health care, you have education. I believe we need child care in this country. Here we could have child care at $10 a day, like in Canada, $300 a month, and child care workers paid $20 an hour. The cost of that is about $80 billion a year. We're increasing our defense budget by $150 billion just this year. Think about what would make this country more productive and stronger vis-a-vis the rest of the world. Putting in $150 billion more in traditional defense, or having $80 billion that would provide universal child care to every family across this country at $10 a day, with paying child care workers $20 an hour. We need, of course, a rational housing policy in this country. We need to stop private equity from buying up single-family homes, and stop Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae from subsidizing private equity from doing that. We need to make sure that we're building far more housing in terms of the restrictive zoning and incentivizing through federal funding, both the funding of public housing, social housing, and affordable housing across this country. And we do need, in my view, to have rent caps so that rents aren't going higher than inflation. We have a distorted market. The market is artificially constrained in supply. Given that artificial distortion, landlords are winning out more than the renters. We want to, all the rent cap does is make sure that that distortion doesn't exist while we adopt pro-building policies. But having affordable housing, having an affordable rent needs to be part of this economic promise to Americans. If Americans have health care, if they have education, if they have housing, if they have child care, and if they have economic activity in their communities, then I believe they will start to rebuild a sense of promise in the American experience, in the American dream, the kind of dream that my parents came to this country for. And maybe I'll end with that. See, my parents came here in the years when Mr. Galbraith's father was in India. As he was in India, my parents were coming here in the Kennedy years. And because that was the time where America was the place to be. We were humming with activity. We were building things around the world. We were the vision of leadership for human civilization. You came to America not just because you wanted a better life, because you wanted to be part of the economic revolution in the country, of the scientific revolution, of the technology revolution, of the move of a country that was going to make its mark for civilization. And that's what we need to get back in this country. And my parents came here, and I was born in Philadelphia, and they said, "You won the lottery. You were born American. Go work hard. Go learn about the country's history. Go learn about as much in the English language as you can, because being strong in English means being strong in America." Most immigrant families are deeply patriotic. We were born of Hindu faith, and we used to have Christmas lights outside our street, because when they said the Khannas are moving in, people said, well, are they going to still celebrate Christmas? My parents said, well, Hindus celebrate all holidays. And we've celebrated Christmas. And I grew up at a town in Bucks County, 99% white, but never felt that I was not able to do anything I wanted to do in this country. At 14, the Bucks County Courier-Times published my first op-ed, "Read This 14-Year-Old's Lips, George," at the first Gulf War. I thought the president was going to read my op-ed. Now I realize the president still doesn't read my op-eds. But the point is, it was a country that made me believe anything is possible. I believe that vision of America is still needed. I believe the way we overcome Trumpism is not to just resort to the same insults. It's not to resort to a politics of spectacle. It's not even, though I respect folks who do, to charge out and yell out and just engage in a politics of opposition and resistance. It has to be deeper than that. We have to speak to the hopes of this country, the dreams of this country, the vision of this country, the yearning desire of a country exhausted and embarrassed to be inspired again, to have new dreams, to build a new vision. I call it a new economic patriotism, to reimagine communities across this country, private sector and government, to rebuild them and to provide Americans with the economic security and independence to be able to achieve their dreams. That's what I want to work on with all of you, to help shape what this economic agenda can look like, that not only helps provide people with security, but helps finally bring this country together with some kind of healing and new purpose. So with that, I thank you, and I would love to open it up for a conversation.
See if I can get a mic to work. So we'll just take a stack from the audience, and I just maybe just very quickly, if possible, yeah, come up to one of the mics or just raise your hands, and we'll get a mic to you. And by the way, if you want to see something amazing with Khanna, and this is interesting because it's because I like Bob Dylan a lot, that there's this Catholic cardinal, I believe, in Rochester, New York now, and he has these nice little videos commenting on Bob Dylan songs. So I would click on him and watch this very interesting comments on Bob Dylan songs. Bob Dylan, of course, having a long history in this region. And then I all of a sudden stumbled on him in dialogue with Khanna, and it's an incredible dialogue. So I'm going to pass on questions and go to questions from the audience. I want to ask one myself. So let's go to this gentleman right here.
Ro, thank you so much I was born in India. My daughter's here with me right now. She was born in the U.S. So there's a lot that resonates here with me. What you've said today, I really appreciate that. My question is about something that you didn't really touch upon, because I couldn't disagree with anything you said, but you made no mention of ecological boundaries in all of this economic development. So there was no mention of the climate crisis or the biodiversity loss that we are facing. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, please.
Yeah, it's a very good point. And of course, we have a climate crisis that's existential. I'm probably scarred by times going to places like Pennsylvania where it's say, and we're going to have new steel, and people clap. And I said, and the advantage is the steel will be green and clean, and they stopped clapping. I said, it's the same steel, but we have so politicized climate, unfortunately, in this country. And we have to figure out, how do we start to talk about the climate in ways that are not political? One of the easiest ways to talk about it is just it's new technology. Solar is at 4 to 5 cents a kilowatt hour. It's cheaper than wind. It's cheaper than nuclear. It's certainly cheaper than oil and gas. I often say to my Republican friends, why would you want the flip phone when you can have the iPhone? I mean, it's just better and faster and cheaper. We need to, as a country, lead on new energy sources. We need to understand that the costs of climate catastrophes, as we've seen in my state with the wildfires, as we've seen in other places with the tornadoes and the hurricanes, are going to be devastating if we don't do something. And we know what we need to do. We need to double down on renewable energy. We need to make sure that we have energy efficiency and energy storage. We need to make sure that we're not building new drilling and for new fossil fuel infrastructure on federal lands. We need to make sure that we are increasing our public transportation. And so I believe we have to articulate this climate vision in context of a new economic vision that builds economic prosperity, economic security for people in communities. President Biden tried to do that. We tried to do that with the Inflation Reduction Act, but I think it was not successful enough, and then it was muddled with some of the allowing for development in Alaska and the Willow Project. But I think next time we need to have both declare a climate emergency, have a clear climate vision, and also show how those jobs really are coming in these local communities.
Let's have someone on this side here, maybe this gentleman here, and then we'll make sure we get gender diversity.
I have more of a comment than a question, but I think it would be important for us to somehow coordinate the great ideas that you were talking about here that have to do with the production side of the economy with the discussions from this morning where we were talking about the actual motivations on the finance side. We have to move away from what they were talking about this morning in terms of finance being driven by size of assets under management and by being driven by Ponzi scheme kinds of financing alternatives. Those things continue to drive us down into a continuation of the status quo when we need significant changes, new ideas that you're talking about. But in order to get them off the ground, you're going to need to change the underlying financial incentives, as they were talking about this morning. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that, we had lunch with James Galbraith, I don't know if he's here, and he made a comment coming in that you're going to need to have control over the financial structure of Wall Street because the incentives are short-termism and capital going to the highest return and not necessarily capital going to Johnstown, Pennsylvania. And how are you going to do this? And I think it's a big challenge because I think that the reality politically, you could do stock buyback tax, you could do a financial transaction tax. Do I think that we are going to have the political ability to fundamentally control Wall Street like FDR did with the New Deal? Probably not. And so the question is, in the constraints that we have, how do we build economic investment in places that aren't just operating on short-termism and financial speculation? But I think you're absolutely right to raise the issue of financial capital in the system and to understand how far we can push in a modern context, what's realistic, and how we achieve that in the goals I've outlined.
Show of hands again. And if we can get a mic to you right there. Thank you. And by the way, the DEI imposition is me, not Bard College, so don't come after Bard's federal funding.
Thank you so much, Representative Khanna. I was curious if you could speak to sort of your strategy for organizing your colleagues around, say, the economic rights agenda. Like, what obstacles do you encounter when trying to mobilize other electeds around these ideas? Like, what are the counter arguments you're hearing, and do you have any ideas for how to create the broad-based coalition that Alan was mentioning? Thank you.
Well, I appreciate that very much. We have a progressive caucus that is mobilized largely around ideas of Medicare for all, higher taxes on billionaires and millionaires, a living wage, child care at $10 an hour or some kind of universal child care, free public college, free trade schools. Those are issues that the progressives have been fighting for, that Bernie fought for, that Elizabeth Warren fought for in that wing of the party. I don't know, I was just discussing this in the morning. The metric right now in terms of whether someone's seen as left or not has become less their programmatic agenda and more how much fight they're taking on to Donald Trump. My own view is that's not sufficient. It's not sufficient to just say, okay, we're going to do everything we can to resist unconstitutional actions by Donald Trump, and that's going to define progressivism if we're not willing to embrace programmatic a programmatic agenda for a fairer society and a more productive society. The obstacles to it is it's going to mean raising taxes. The obstacles to it is it's going to mean taking on big pharma and insurance companies. The obstacle to it is it's going to mean hearing people demagogue Medicare for all as socialized medicine. The obstacle to it is that people are going to say, well, there's too much spending for childcare and education, and that this is not the types of investment that the country needs, that we need to be cutting that kind of social spending. So you have in the party a default membership that doesn't want to rock the boat too much on Medicare for all, on child care, on increasing taxes, then wants to take the fight to Donald Trump on the things that are so deeply egregious, like putting Marines in LA, deeply and truly egregious, like going after universities, and thinks that like cutting Medicaid, like cutting food assistance, and thinks that the election can be won in being oppositional to an agenda that is unraveling the New Deal, as opposed to an agenda that is expanding upon the New Deal. And that is really the division in the party.
Next up, and the woman more there in front, sorry, to the woman behind you. But maybe you just hand the mic back to the woman behind you for the fourth and fifth questions. Thank you. Right there. First the woman in the colored dress, and then the woman in red afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you for that inspirational talk. I think many of us agree with everything you said here. And I think a lot of us would like to see higher taxes on wealthy people, but what economists associated with the Institute, and I happen to be one of them, find problematic is when we start attaching higher taxes to the other priorities that we would like to see happen, such as we have to tax the wealthy so that we can afford childcare and health care for the rest of us so that we can afford fighting climate change. And of course that hamstrings policy, right? On both fronts, we don't tax the wealthy enough, at least we don't demand high enough taxes, just marginal tweaks here and there. And then on the other hand, we say, well, we can't afford to go big and bold because we cannot raise so much revenue. So I guess I'm wondering and obviously progressives, I feel, fall into that trap as well, the pay for, rules that you have to abide by and so on. And to what extent do you think that should be a priority for progressives in Congress to try to get rid of these rules that, never hurt the other side, and they only hurt progressive policies?
When we took back the Congress in 2018, I voted against the rule, which basically sets up the rules for all of the Congress, because it had the pay-go provision, which basically said that everything had to be paid for, because I said that that's just bad economics. What if you have a recession? What if you have programs that have productive investment? And I was one of a few people who did on principle. But your broader point, I think, is correct, that the Republicans get in, they provide huge tax breaks and huge run-ups to the military. They don't worry about the deficit. We get in, we end up doing more to bring the deficit down traditionally, and we don't end up then expanding the social program. And in part, I think this is one of the reasons the Republicans cut the taxes, because they know that that puts the Democrats in a position where they can't expand the government, and they want to keep the government small. So I think the Democrats have to both make a vision for productive growth, that a lot of the investments we're talking about are productive, that they're going to build economic wealth, they're going to grow the economy, they're going to grow it at 2.5%, 3%. I think we have to talk about lowering the defense budget, where there's now over $1 trillion. We need to talk about the savings we would have from getting rid of Medicare Advantage's fraud, from pharmaceutical drugs. I put out a budget that would have actually lowered the deficit by $12 trillion if we'd have done some of those things. Now, I understand there's some people who say, well, deficits don't matter, it's inflation. I think the American people, from a practical view, very hard to convince the American people that you can just be oblivious to deficits, but I think what we can say is that we need to focus on progressive taxation, cutting the bloat out of the military, cutting Medicare Advantage fraud, and then expanding the social safety net and productive investment in ways that are good for the economy. And this is, again, where I do believe that we have to have economic success, be seen as a party of economic growth, economic opportunity, economic dynamism, to make the case easier for the expansion of the social safety state.
Hi, thank you for your service to our country, and thank you for being here. So many questions in this moment right now, but I'm really concerned about the security of our elections. There are real questions as to whether Donald Trump even won legitimately. If you ever follow Greg Palast's work, he's been crunching the numbers on that. And I want to know what the Democratic Party has in place, especially for next year in the midterms, to actually make sure that we have secure elections.
Well, it's a good question. I think the bigger challenge with the elections are the closing of polling places in predominantly black areas, less polling places, longer lines, kicking people off the registration roll that they're doing in certain states, intimidating folks in ways where people may feel intimidated to come out to vote. And what we need to do is make sure, that they don't have law enforcement out on election day or during the election period. The good news is elections in this country are fairly decentralized, so there are a lot of places where you have Democratic governors, Democratic mayors, but we need a citizen army, which we're recruiting at the DNC, of lawyers, of activists, to be at polling places, to be advocating for the policies of fairness and trying to get people the opportunity to vote. Now, all of that, I think, is just fighting with one arm tied behind our back until we can get the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which would really require equity in polling places and require people to not kick folks off voting rolls. But right now, we just need a volunteer group that the DNC is organizing to be monitoring these elections.
Thank you for that. And actually, I want to point out that as a Californian, it'll be very hard for the Trump administration to impact in blue states, such as New York and California, and the 2016 midterms for the House, which may be as important an election as we've ever had in the country, because I think the signal that would be sent to the Trump administration if the Republicans control the House would be extreme. But that election, they can't really gerrymander the red states any more than they're gerrymandered. So this will be determined in states like New York and California, where there are Republican seats that can be flipped. And I don't think that they'll impact the voting too much. So it's a little political point right there. Next up, let's see who's up. Let's go. I know you had a hand up right away, so let's go to you.
Okay, so question that you're probably not going to answer, but based upon your speech, it sounds like, you know, a presidential speech. Have you ever considered running for president? And follow up to that, if you were to run for president, would you consider having a non-traditional economist, as Bernie did, be your advisor, someone like we have in the front row there?
I thought, look, Bernie Sanders has accomplished a tremendous amount. I mean, he's a figure of American history. In many ways, he's done the harder job, both in running in 2016 and in running in 2020, getting all the way almost up to the mountaintop. I fundamentally believe, and I would, if he were 10 to 15 years younger, back him and think he would become president of the United States. That's just my opinion of where the country is. It's sort of a vindication. We see this in the extraordinary crowds he's drawing around the country. No one is going to have the same opportunity as Bernie Sanders, because Bernie Sanders has a lot of collective goodwill built over 10 years. But I do think that there is an opportunity for a progressive to build a governing majority in 2028, and we'll have to see how that plays out. I don't think the way to do that is going to be to provide the same economic analysis as we've had for the last 40, 50 years. One of the things that I think Joe Biden could never get himself to do was to say simple things like the deregulation of the trucking industry under Jimmy Carter was a mistake that hurt pensions across America. NAFTA was a mistake by Bill Clinton that gutted factory towns. Allowing China into the World Trade Organization on the terms that they did was a mistake by both Republican and Democratic administrations. Just saying those basic things builds you credibility with people that then makes you hear the future. That doesn't mean that Clinton or Carter or others didn't get a lot of things right. Maybe I would have in the same time been influenced by people and made similar mistakes, but we now have the benefit of seeing how that story played out. And what I think any leader should do is to have diverse voices that question the status quo and question conventionality, but don't simply reject conventionality, as you saw with Donald Trump. I mean, sometimes there's some value to conventionality, like just blanket tariffs untargeted don't work. So you need, I think, both. The final thing I'll say, though, is that the most urgent lesson I learned from FDR is bold experimentation. You have Donald Trump out there saying that we should conquer Greenland or Panama, and people just kind of shrug. And then if someone on the Democratic side says, let's be for Medicare for all, they say, well, you can't say that. That's going to lose you the election. I mean, there's a total disconnect on risk-taking between the Republican side and the Democratic side. The Republican side is far bolder for, in my view, terrible ends often. But we need a boldness of new ideas, of new vision. Not all of them are going to be good. Not all of them are going to be correct. That's the definition of experimentation. But I think the country wants a new direction. And so my hope would be to have bold thinkers involved with whoever the Democratic nominee will be.
Let's go to, well, you're right here, so the man in the cap right here. The man in the cap right there.
Hello, I'm not an economist.
They let you in, huh? Like me.
I work here. They had to. You've talked a lot about things that would contribute to sort of political democracy, what I would call fairness in elections, and the progress that we've made in increasing voter rolls and registration and voter freedoms, and how we have to fight to protect all of that. All of the injustices that are going on there and the things we're doing to counter them. But what about a notion, and forgive me if this is something learned people debate more, of direct economic democracy, where what are the ways that democratic processes can influence the actual application of the productive capacity of our industries? You know, why do I need to see an entire aisle of CVS devoted to varieties of toothpaste? And if we weren't doing that, aren't there ways that that productive capacity could be more meaningfully channeled? And I just wonder if you had any thoughts about that. Thank you.
Well, I definitely think that the state should be involved in helping provide economic security and independence for individuals and build productive capacity in communities and for the country. For individuals, I think most directly it means raising wages. It means giving workers a share in profits and some sense of stock. I mean, if Mary Barra can make $30 million by being paid for performance, why can't an auto worker also get a share of the equity and ownership? It means having collective bargaining and labor neutrality so we can build unions. And for a productive capacity, it means saying, look, there are certain goals that the country has. We want to build advanced steel. We want to build new ships. We want to build new biotechnology. We want to build in new communities. How do we provide federal capital to do that? How do we work with the labor and private sector to do that? In terms of your example, I may slightly disagree there, because I said to, when the president had the comment about, which was very, very ironic, where here this gold-plated president is saying to the kids that you can only have 2 to 3 dolls, that they don't need 30 dolls. And I said, first of all, it's Donald Trump, who's the gold-plated everything. I said the quintessential American experience is going to a grocery store and seeing 30 cereal boxes. This is like when my relatives would come from India. They're like, wow, you have 30 cereal boxes. So with due respect to Mr. Galbraith's father, I don't think you're going to take consumerism out of the American experience. But I think that what you can do is to channel the consumerism in a way that can still build and be balanced with jobs and economic production. I think the problem in this country is that we paid so much homage to consumerism that we forgot about good-paying jobs, we forgot about community, we forgot about the other balances of an economy. But there are, people who disagree with me on that point.
We have time for one final question, and I will go to the woman right there. Yes, yourself, and here comes the microphone. And thank you for everybody else who has a question.
We don't have time for a few more?
Pavlina?
Or no, I don't want to run over for your conference.
6 minutes.
Okay.
Hi. I hope I can phrase this question without getting into any trouble, but worldwide, do you think it's happening that the left-wing governments or the people who are not on the right are trying to become a light version of right to not lose votes or not lose vote share or just to be acceptable to everyone? We see this happening in India. We see it happening all over, so I just want your views on that.
Look, I think that people tend to bend towards where power is, and this happened with the Reagan Revolution, where the Democratic Party basically bent towards deregulation and free markets. With Trump, there was a risk of that when he won 7 swing states and a risk of perhaps accommodation. I don't think, though, that has been the posture of the Democratic Party 4 months in, because my view is that Trump has so overreached on even what he was elected to do that it has provided at least unity in the Democratic Party about being oppositional. The people who have tried to and I don't want to mention names because I don't want to criticize other politicians, but the people who have tried to be accommodationists with Trump have sort of seen their political stock decline. The fight, I think, in the Democratic Party will be, do you want to try to win in 26 and 28 on saying Donald Trump is doing so much damage to the Constitution, to our values of immigration, to our universities, to the basic social safety net of Medicaid and food assistance, and he's giving tax breaks to the billionaires, and we need to just restore the country to a sense of decency? Or do you want to win by saying, yes, all of that, but he's also diagnosed a fundamental problem in the country, and we need an inspirational programmatic agenda to address that? And I think that there's no way of knowing which one of those debates wins. Obviously, Bernie Sanders represents not just a progressive wing, he represents a wing, or Elizabeth Warren, that says we need to offer a programmatic agenda different from the status quo for the Democratic Party. And that, I think, is really the fault line. I don't think people will be running on accommodating Trump. I don't see that happening in the party.
Thank you. And let's go right here to the woman with the glasses who is now about to stand up, and she's standing up. There we go.
Thank you so much. So first of all, you were introduced as a progressive, but when you talk about this Marshall Plan and building more housing, it also sounds like abundance politics that is especially ascendant here in New York and California, and I was wondering if you could describe the overlaps or differences between those two. And then if I have a two-part question, I'm originally from the Bay Area. My husband still works in one of the frontier AI labs, and something that I'm observing is that in his peer group, there's this belief that if you are top talent and you want to build great things, you go into startup, into investor land, and not into government. We saw a little bit of Elon recruiting tech workers into DC, but do you have a better idea about how the government can attract top talent?
Yeah, the second question is a much tougher one. The first one, look, I am sympathetic to the thesis of abundance, which says we want to make more things in America faster and better as an outcome. What I believe, though, is that the solutions recommended, which is let's have a better state capacity, which is often expressed as let's have not more better people, but less bureaucratic regulation on permitting, is only 10 to 15% of the problem. That what you also need is federal financing. What you also need is federal procurement. What you also need is workforce development. What you also need is public schools and trade schools. What you also need is the social safety net around it with childcare and healthcare to have a vibrant community. So that if it were only so simple that you could just deregulate your way to production, it has resonance for the same reason, though I agree with some of it, that it has that resonance for the same reason Trump has resonance, which is to say this country wants to build things. This country wants to build things faster. Trump saying, well, tariff and do it. Saying, okay, well, deregulate and do it is easy. But I fear that the sacrifices for a society and the changes to do that is going to be much deeper. It's going to require policies similar to what Hamilton, Lincoln, FDR had, and abundance has to be one part of it, the execution, but it's not the silver bullet or even the leading part as much as it is a constituent part. In terms of attracting talent to government, the challenge has to be a politics, I think, that inspires. I was drawn to Barack Obama when he won, and I believe that there were a lot of people who were inspired and ready to work for him. And he created the digital core that then Musk bastardized into this Doge. But I think if a Bernie Sanders were to win, if there was someone if Elizabeth Warren had won, if someone wins wins with an agenda of providing a new direction for the nation, I think people will be inspired to participate, or God forbid, if there's a crisis. But I think in the status quo politics, where people don't see much change, where they don't see much crisis, they don't feel it's worth their time and effort, especially given the vitriol that we see today. Maybe one last question? Yeah.
I think we have to wrap.
Okay, wrap.
And I just, I did want to say, first of all, I really, really appreciate everything you said. You know, PDA has put forward a proposal for a rural New Deal, and just how much what you're outlining resonates in rural and small town America, that have pretty much become a one-party part of the United States with Republican control. So just a thing to leave behind is the idea of how to communicate with those communities. And then lastly, while everything you said, I think, adds up to tremendous economic growth, I could still imagine so much of the investor class opposing the agenda, and then how do you speak to them? But I'll just leave, maybe that could be a spark for your final comments in 1 or 2 minutes as you sign off, and everybody row Khanna.
Well, first of all, thank you. I could have, as you could tell, I would love to stay longer, and I enjoy this much more than other parts of politics, so I appreciate your engagement. And I'm just at rowkhanna1@gmail. If any of you have further thoughts and ideas, that'll get directly to me. It's rowkhanna1@gmail. And if you didn't get to ask a question, if you have ideas or a great proposal. Look, I do think it'll be opposed by the investor class because the investor class has its mission currently the maximization of profit and the maximization of shareholder profit and the maximization of wealth. And they see the investment of government as inefficient and wasteful, and they see anything that's interfering with their maximization of wealth as harmful to be feared. But I think the case that has to be made is that the biggest challenge to wealth in this country, the biggest challenge to economic success and prosperity in this country, is the rise of a populist right-wing movement, perhaps after Trump, which is even more disciplined, that goes about the destruction of all kinds of trade, all kinds of immigration, all kinds of universities, all kinds of science, that a nation fundamentally cannot exist half prosperous and half deindustrialized, half producing the most wealth in the world and the other half struggling and reminiscing about the past. You know, I used to say, because my parents came from India, that you could never run in India a campaign saying, let's go back to the 1950s, let's be great again. It takes a great country to have nostalgia. And America is a great country. But the reality is a politics of nostalgia, which is what will take hold if we don't articulate a way of bridging the fundamental economic divides by geography and class in this country, will be a politics that is perhaps most destructive to a true free enterprise system. That basically, in a nutshell, is a modern version of the argument that FDR made. As you know, students of history, FDR was not liked very well by some people on the far left who wanted him to go further. But he said, I am going to fundamentally transform capitalism to save capitalism. And I think that that is probably the best argument that we can make to the investor class today. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.